We are now going to go to our session, which is live in progress, which is the Great Lakes Commission, along with the International Joint Commission, and they're talking about Lake Erie and Great Lakes nutrients. Let's go ahead and take a listen.
Our next two speakers, or I can handle it from here, Dave Dempsey and Tim, you're going to be up again in this panel. And just note, if you want to have good policy conversations over wine, I recommend sitting down with Dareth Glantz tonight, preferably a red wine. You will have a great conversation about environmental issues and water quality. Over to you, Lana.
I actually, is this on? I think you've just done it. Why don't you continue? You're doing such a fabulous job.
Well, if I may, Dave Dempsey? Come on up. Would you prefer the podium or the speaker's table? Very good. Okay, here's IJC Policy Advisor Dave Dempsey. Thank you.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the IJC staff, I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk to you and answer some questions about the IJC's emerging work on the issues affecting Lake Erie, particularly harmful algal blooms and the causes of the harmful blooms. I'm going to go to the next slide. The Commission, over the last couple of biennial water quality cycles under the Water Quality Agreement, has established multi-board priority work groups which have produced individual reports on important Great Lakes topics. Here you'll see the reports from our last biennial cycle, which ended in 2011, on a number of those topics, including recreational beaches and recreational water quality and rapid response to invasive species. In the current cycle, which is now going to be a triennial cycle under the new Water Quality Agreement, we have adopted an approach where we focus our resources on a slightly smaller but more in-depth set of resources or issues. Next slide, please. Here are the three major priorities the Commission has adopted at a retreat held earlier this year in Montreal. The one I want to focus on today, of course, is the Lake Erie ecosystem priority to reduce phosphorus and algal blooms. We've given it the acronym of LEAP. We're also going to be conducting priorities to assess the progress toward restoring the Great Lakes as part of our new and renewed duties, I should say, under the new Water Quality Agreement, and strengthening our capacity and the capacity of the Great Lakes community to deliver science and information. Next slide, please. Later this afternoon, we'll be hearing a little bit about, a lot more actually, about the science behind what's going on in Lake Erie, but I think for the public, the major story is what they're seeing on the Great Lakes, particularly the harmful algal bloom, record proportions in western Lake Erie last year. Next slide. Now, what we've been hearing from many people is that it will take many years to see water quality improvements in Lake Erie from the current algal bloom situation. Commission is in its role of assessing progress and advising the governments, not necessarily buying into that advice. We'd like to see more aggressive efforts, more timely efforts to at least begin to reverse the trends in Lake Erie. And so the Commission set this very ambitious goal for our work in the next 3 years. I won't read it to you, but I guess the key phrase is that within 3 years, our vision is that we will have begun to measurably reduce dissolved reactive phosphorus going into Lake Erie. So in other words, we want to see a beginning of a reversal of the harmful trends that we've seen over the last 15 years or so. Next slide. Now, we've been having public outreach meetings around Lake Erie during the last month or so, and we've been acquiring ideas from citizens and others involved in the problem on how to deal with algal blooms. We've also been acquiring community-based reports on what people are seeing, and this is an example of a set of photographs provided to us at the Leamington meeting we held in August of blue-green algae that was identified on the beaches around Point Pelee, Ontario. So you can see, even though this year has not been as devastating as last year in the extent and depth of the algae bloom, it's still happening in many places around the lake. Next slide, please. Of course, the success of the agreement signed by President Nixon and Prime Minister Trudeau in 1972 is well known, well heralded, and one of the most important achievements of that initial agreement was to drive the efforts to reduce phosphorus loadings in the Great Lakes and resulting algae blooms. I think it's important to remember that progress followed in a relatively quick period. Between 1972 and basically 1983, we saw such dramatic reductions that the algae bloom was considered, reductions in algae blooms was considered a worldwide success story, that the Great Lakes were sort of the leader in restoring ecosystems, and we think that can be done again. This picture on the right, which is of the signing just last Friday of the Great Lakes Water Quality Protocol of 2012, as it's being called, gives us the opportunity to follow in the footsteps of our previous generations and try to produce another worldwide success story. Next slide, please. As Lana and Lyle mentioned, Commissioner Pollack, Commissioner Knott, the IJC is a transboundary institution. We deal with boundary waters all the way from coast to coast. And the Great Lakes is just one of our many important projects that we deal with. Next slide, please. Now, the Lake Erie ecosystem priorities, I think, two things to focus on. One is that we do value public participation and outreach, which I'll describe in a second. It's also a science-based effort. We have brought in scientists from across the basin, some from outside the basin, in fact, who are experts in the areas related to algal blooms and phosphorus. And these are some of the names, some of the many names of individuals from agencies and academic institutions and others who are contributing to our work in LEAP. Next slide, please. So what are we going to produce? Well, here's a list of some of the products from our Lake Erie ecosystem priority. Essentially, we're going to take what is known, the best science that is available, and compiling it into a series of documents that we will use toward our final product. And again, I won't read these individual papers to you, but you will see that we'll be considering everything from the effects of climate change on algal blooms to looking at the monitoring programs across the basin for phosphorus loadings. Next slide, please. We're also going to look at the human element, the economics and the social factors that lead to both the problem of algal blooms and also the solutions. What are some of the economic incentives for excess phosphorus loadings? What are some of the incentives that could be created to reduce those loadings? What are some of the individual behavioral barriers to reduce phosphorus inputs, for example? And these will also be compiled into papers. We'll also have, through our Water Quality Board, a review paper being done on the legislative and regulatory framework that governs this matter. Next slide. Here are our timelines. Probably the ones that are most important for this audience to be aware of are the Lake Erie workshop that we're going to be holding in February of next year to review the draft papers that I just talked about and to come up with some draft findings to be presented later on in the year. We hope to have an interim report on LEAP by May of 2013, in which we will seek some public consultation. And then we'll intend to finalize our report with recommendations to the governments in October or so, the fall, but probably October of 2013. We don't know for sure under the new agreement when the first Great Lakes Forum, which is called for by the agreement, will be held, but we believe it might be in the fall of 2013. And if so, we will time our report to coincide with that forum that's called for. And then the remaining 2 years of the triennial cycle, we will devote work to implementing and furthering the recommendations in our report. And obviously, I have to stress that the Commission does not implement programs. We advise the governments on recommendations for dealing with problems of this sort, and that's the format in which our advice will be provided. Next slide, please. Here are the locations of the public meetings that we have held and are going to hold. One of those meetings will take place tonight in the town hall session from starting at 7 o'clock at the same venue as the reception. We have one further meeting planned after that in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. We've had good turnout at all of the meetings, a lot of public interest in the problem and also solutions, and we've benefited a lot from that. Next slide, please. And here are some of the facts about those hearings. Our open houses, I should say meetings are open houses. We've heard from nearly 200 people who've attended the meetings. And we've heard some concerns that have not been addressed in depth by many other institutions and studies that we want to investigate. Concerns about the possible contributions of sources like open lake dumping of dredged navigational sediments. Are power plants and their thermal discharges contributing in any way to phosphorus and algae problems? And obviously we've been hearing from citizens that they don't want to see time wasted. They want to see action as soon as possible to help clean up Lake Erie, particularly western Lake Erie. Next slide, please. So with that, I will close and hope we have opportunity a little later, Tim, perhaps to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. As Dave noted, I think we'll have some time for some questions and discussion and Dave, I'll ask you to come back up here. Perhaps the questions will be directed to the IJC commissioners, as well as you might have some questions about the task force report that I'm going to talk about. As I mentioned in my earlier remarks, the task force was created last year by this body at the 2011 annual meeting, and this is the results of the work. Now in 2010, the commission issued an action item and tasked the staff with writing an issue brief that, among other things, documented programs and activities management programs that are being undertaken on the state, provincial, and federal level. And that report is also at your tables. So you got 3 reports. One of them is the programs report in addition to the task force report. Okay, so this isn't the greatest picture because of the light in this room, but this is what was going on a year ago. We had our annual meeting in Detroit, and this was taken in October of 2011. This was a picture of Lake Erie taken from space, of course. And what you see here is algae blooms fed by excessive phosphorus from various point and non-point sources. And this is occurring not just in Lake Erie. We're here today, of course, but this is a special problem in Lake Erie, Saginaw Bay on Lake Huron, Green Bay on Lake Michigan, and in many other nearshore areas, including on Lake Ontario. This is especially troubling because it comes after 2 decades of progress. Dave talked about the terrific progress made following the signing of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, the tremendous success that we made 40 years ago, the success of the Clean Water Act, the billions of dollars that have been invested in cleaning up discharges from point sources, from cities and industries, terrific progress made in addressing those visible sources, but now the problems are returning. So what's going on? What do we know about the causes? Well, you're going to hear more later from Dr. Jeff Reiter from Ohio State University, so I'm not going to get into the details, but I will, the task force did look at some of the causes and made some findings that I will talk about. But the consequences are quite significant. They caused some very severe impacts on Lake Erie last year. In addition to the unsightly scenes and the unattractiveness of the water resource for recreation purposes, there were extra costs imposed on drinking water plants that had to treat algae with additional chlorine and filtration. Pets died. At least I'm told that some pets were exposed to toxic algae, and But of course, this year it's a different story on Lake Erie. This year we caught a break. Last year, lots of snow and rain in the spring, tremendous rainfall in the early spring, and runoff at a time when the ground was exposed. And the runoff, of course, carried with it not only soil, but phosphorus, which was not incorporated into the soil at the time of the runoff. This year, of course, we had near drought conditions, no runoff, no algae blooms. Now, I mentioned that Lake Erie is the poster child, but it's not the only place. So the commission, because of this being a region-wide problem, the commissioners asked the Great Lakes Commission to look into it. Part of the reason that it was appropriate for us to look into it is that we had already had a task force, a steering committee that helped us administer the Great Lakes Basin Program for Soil Erosion and Sediment Control, made up of state experts, state representatives that had been working with us since the early 90s on setting priorities to run that Great Lakes Basin Program. And so it was a natural entity, forum for us to build on. We did issue the issue brief that reviews and describes nutrient management programs. And as I mentioned, that report is here. That report was very useful and very instrumental in helping the task force do its work. The resolution itself was included in Appendix A of the report. I'm not going to read it to you, of course, but you can see what it called for. Basically, in essence, the key nugget is that it called for the development of a suite of recommendations for federal, state, and provincial actions to reduce phosphorus and focus in areas related to funding for clean water infrastructure, research, technical assistance, outreach, education, and expanding and enhancing programs under the Farm Bill, under the 2012 Farm Bill. Representation from all jurisdictions, 17 members of the task force. Again, we really appreciate the work of the members of the task force, and I especially want to recognize Don Zelazny. Don served as chair of the task force. Don's one of our commissioners from New York. He's unable to be here today, but this was a lot of work, and we really appreciate Don's support. So the task force got itself set up in 2011, in November of 2011. Meetings, conference calls, numerous conference calls took place throughout the late 2011 and 2012. The task force divided itself into working groups on point sources, non-point, and innovation and research, and they came up with some general findings. Now, as you're gathering from Dave's presentation and my remarks, the focus is on dissolved phosphorus. Whereas in the past, the attention was on total phosphorus. The Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement looked at establishing target loads for the lakes of total phosphorus. Now we realize that dissolved phosphorus is 3 times more relevant, 3 times more available than particulate phosphorus, and it needs to be the focus of our attention. The amount of dissolved phosphorus has in several critical watersheds has been steadily increasing. What you see on the left-hand side of this slide is an increase in a particular kind of algae, but that tracks the increase in dissolved phosphorus. And we've reached the pre-cleanup levels of the 1970s with dissolved practices. And why is that? The task force asked that question and looked into it, and it appears that the largest single answer is changing farming practices. There are other confounding factors, but in the view of the task force, the biggest single factor is changing farming practices. And the reason that they reached that conclusion is the slide on the right-hand side. I don't know how well you can see it, but the red part of that graph down at the bottom, not the red line, but the red part of the bars at the bottom, shows releases of phosphorus from point sources. And you can see that over the last 20 years or so, discharges of phosphorus from point sources have remained relatively constant during the past 2 decades. So that's the conclusion. Now, changes in farming practices while point sources are staying the same, this seems to be the general conclusion. And one of the things that's going on is a smaller number of farmers are farming a larger number of acres, and that creates some challenges for farmers. The larger farmers tend to apply, they've got a bigger burden to tackle in terms of getting their fertilizer on the ground. And one of the things that we think is going on is that they're broadcast fertilizing, spreading it, broadcasting it, instead of injecting it into the ground where it's less exposed to erosion. The other thing that's happening is with larger farms, there's more acres to manage. It's more difficult to get the work done in a timely fashion. And so some of the fertilizer spreading happens in the winter and early spring while the ground is exposed. And again, as it's exposed, it's more available to run off. So these changes in methods are likely contributing to the increases that we're seeing in the lakes. There are some other factors that are confounding the situation. Invasive species, zebra and quagga mussels, are moving the nutrients around, increasing water clarity so that sunlight can stimulate algae growth to a deeper level, and generally changing the way carbon and nutrients move through the ecosystem. Also may be increasing harmful algal blooms. Climate change may be a contributing factor as well, which is leading to increased storm frequency and storm intensity due to climate change. There's been an increase in the percentage of urban and suburban land uses in many areas of the Great Lakes Basin, and this could be changing runoff patterns as well. So building on this, the task force looked at several areas for recommendations, and this slide just simply breaks down the different areas under which they formulated their recommendations, and you'll see this organizational structure in the report. But the bottom line is that the legislative and programmatic responses to both point and non-point sources and pollution abatement in the 70s and 80s was significant, and it was effective. We can look to Lake Erie as being a success story, but the 21st century challenges that we're seeing today, the findings of the task force are that we need new and innovative approaches to address this problem. So, some of the recommendations. Funding is critical. Funding under the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, the task force recommended that the GLRI could do a better job by providing larger block grants to the states for the states to utilize in large watershed scale projects rather than the smaller type of grants that I mentioned earlier. Also, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, should provide block grants to establish cooperative agreements with the states so that we can be sure that technical assistance is available to deliver conservation treatment programs. One of the limitations in our current management approach is the ability for NRCS managers and practitioners and conservation experts to get on the ground to provide technical assistance to landowners. So if NRCS could provide block grants to the states, they could put those boots on the ground to work with landowners. Soil testing is an important component and something that should be part of the toolkit of landowners everywhere. It happens a lot, but it happens with a lot of farms and conservation management programs. But the question is it being utilized? Are the results of those soil management, soil testing results being utilized? The task force is recommending that the results be made available, results of soil tests be made available to state agencies on a confidential basis. We know that this can be a sensitive issue, but providing it on a confidential basis would enable state agencies to see that it's being utilized and to conduct trend analyses. And also it's important that practitioners, land managers, utilize those results in making management decisions and also applying them when in considering those soil test results when cost share programs are being administered under the Farm Bill. Also, the application of phosphorus fertilizer needs to be applied below the surface wherever possible and incorporated into the soil immediately after application so as to minimize the risk of runoff and erosion. One of the things that the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, the new agreement, does is calls for the establishment of nutrient in-lake standards, nutrient concentration limits, as well as loading limits. And that's actually something that's called for by the task force, a mass balance study and the establishment of nutrient concentrations by ecozone, meaning Western Lake Erie, Saginaw Bay, and so on, as required by the new water quality agreement. And then phosphorus fertilizer equipment should be developed that efficiently places the material onto the soil. On the Farm Bill, the task force was charged with looking at the Farm Bill, and of course there's a series of recommendations in there, including the importance of funding, recognize the importance of the regional conservation programs that you heard me talk about a moment ago, and looking beyond the Farm Bill at state authorities. One of the recommendations, the task force was impressed with the Ohio approach of being able to designate watersheds as stressed, which can result in triggering mandatory actions to reduce loadings. We recommend that other states take a look at the Ohio approach. And then, of course, very important that Congress continue to provide funding for the state revolving fund and wastewater treatment plant upgrades, because that still remains to be an important source. And that fund really took a hit. The proposed funding level for the state revolving fund really took a hit in the President's budget, so we hope that can be increased by Congress. With that, I just want to wrap up by saying that there are reasons to be optimistic. There are a lot of recommendations in here and a lot of things that need to happen. But there are reasons to be optimistic. Ohio has tackled this program head-on, or this challenge head-on, made a lot of progress. Wisconsin has some very progressive programs. I know it's an issue that Jim deals with in his state. Many states are taking action, and this is a common sight in hardware stores around the region. Homeowners, at least in my area, you can't buy phosphorus fertilizer for your lawn anymore. You can buy phosphorus fertilizer if you're a farmer, but not if you're a homeowner, and that's a good thing. We've eliminated, or we're starting to eliminate. I was telling my wife what I was doing down here, and she said, "Oh, I just bought us some phosphorus-free dishwashing detergent." So it's starting. We are starting to see progress and increased public awareness of this issue. Nutrient standards are being established, and the water quality agreement places a major emphasis. There's a new annex dealing with nutrients and water quality, and of course this will be a high priority in the Farm Bill. So there are some things to celebrate and recognize and build on, but we have to remember what happened in 2011. This year, of course, as we noted, we caught a break, but I don't think we want to depend on the vagaries of the weather as our touchstone to determine whether or not we're going to have harmful algal blooms. Let's hope that we can take action. We hope that the task force recommendations will be fodder for further discussion and action, and that we can build on these and avoid situations like this in the future. Thank you. We have a few minutes now, and I would like to ask if the IJC will be willing to take some questions on the Lake Erie priority. Any questions from the commissioners on the results of the task force? If you ask me too detailed questions, I will be happy to refer it to Tom, who's the expert in putting the report together. But if Lana and Dave, if you want to join me up here, commissioners, if you have any questions about this issue, we'd be happy to try to address them now. Anybody?
Well, one thing that, and I want to particularly thank Minnesota, because New York passed a law modeled on Minnesota's low phosphorus fertilizer for homeowners in New York, and we've already seen improvements in certain lakes because of that. What we added to that were requirements, worked very closely with the manufacturers on it, for low phosphorus dishwashing machine detergents, both for homeowners and for institutional users. And those requirements are coming into place, and I don't see any reason why, given the industry accepting it and working on reformulating their products so that they're as effective as those with phosphorus, hopefully, that wouldn't be something that we could try and continue. And I think Minnesota, we followed your lead on that, and grateful for that. And the main thing to keep in mind in all this as we go forward is that that's zero cost. If you pass a law and you just simply get the phosphorus out of the product, that doesn't cost a municipality or a farmer anything. And a lot of that's dissolved phosphorus. And so the one question I have, just to kind of get you going, is within your analysis, both on the IJC level and by the task force, have you found items that are the most cost effective? Practices or places for states and provinces to focus in tight times where you'd get the most bang for the buck?
I only want to say that one of the papers that we're contracting is with an economist or a team of economists to help answer some of the economics that the IJC thinks have been understudied and underreported. Some things are pretty obvious, but it's not really. We know it's a $7 billion industry for fishing. We know that fishing takes a hit from algal blooms, but we're not satisfied that we can go to the public, go to the legislators, go to the parliaments, and say, this is the cost trade-off and what it would cost to invest in better, what it would cost the ag industry to invest in better practices. Maybe they'd even be saving money. Those kind of things need more academics, and we hope they'll be part of what we can offer.
Hey, Jim, if I can answer your question in a moment, but I wanted to say a couple of things about the task force process, but I also wanted to acknowledge the broader work of the staff, and especially Gary Overmeyer, who's in the back room there. From a process standpoint, Gary was responsible for facilitating the work of the task force, and he worked really hard over the past 6 months keeping that group together. It was kind of like herding cats, if you might imagine. And Gary is also a farmer. He has a farm in Liberty Center, Ohio, so he's commuting to our office about an hour and a half each way. So he has a lot of time to think about this stuff. And Gary is a very deep thinker and a very creative thinker. And he also stops every morning and has coffee in a coffee shop where he meets a lot of farmers and fertilizer dealers. And he comes in and he has a lot of really good ideas. And I just wanted to acknowledge his work, because the other thing that Tim didn't mention on this particular report, we had a hard time getting it right. And as Gary will attest, we spent hours in our conference room trying to figure out how to organize all of this information, because we had numerous conference calls, and there are quite a few people in the room here that participated in those. And a lot of information was flowing, and we were trying to figure out how best to organize it. And Gary spent a lot of time working hard to get that information organized. He moved his days off around to accommodate my schedule, and the whole process worked very well. And I also wanted to say that all of the directors sitting over here, we had kind of a marathon session at one point in early August, and we just hauled everybody into the conference room and we went through the whole draft report and just had everybody critique it. So what came out of that, and the task force affirmed this in a couple of conference calls later on where they had a chance to review the report, is what we think is some really good material. Now, to get to your question, one of the things that Tim didn't emphasize in his report, but where we did spend a lot of time talking about, is the value of information education. And we think that that's something where agencies and entities that have an information education mandate really should be investing more in information education, particularly with certain audiences like landowners and fertilizer dealers. Because as Tim mentioned, with the larger farms, the fertilizer dealers are actually doing a lot of the application. And just anecdotally, we believe that the fertilizer dealers would actually be willing to consider changing some of the ways that they do business. But there's a real education gap there. And so one of the things that our task force spent a lot of time talking about was how do you develop and implement information education programs that can really be effective to help us solve that problem.
Thanks, Tom. Senator, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. And it really was triggered by this notion of the low phosphorus residential fertilizer. And I'm wondering if there's any studies or any information that would sort of allocate the levels of phosphorus that are around or in the environment in any particular place between, like, the residential users or the lawn fertilizer versus laundry detergent versus farm fertilizing or any of the other sources. I mean, is there any description of the magnitude of those various sources and as potential sources of the phosphorus?
I suspect that there is, and I suspect that the man who can answer that question is on the next panel, Dr. Jeff Reiter. He might be sitting next to you, but Dr. Jeff Reiter has probably got a good answer to that. The task force simply reported that it thought that the most important source was farm fertilizer runoff, not that others aren't important, and that was the point of your question. So save that one for Jeff. Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, well, I again want to thank all of you. I want to Lana, anything you want to say, Lana, before we wrap up?
Only that I'm struck once again the value and the thoroughness of the work that the Great Lakes Commission is doing, and also how it is complementary to the work that we're doing. And shame on all of us if we spend time repeating each other's work instead of understanding what's already been accomplished, where the gaps are, and how collectively we can fill those gaps and move quickly with actionable science. And the word is actionable science to make changes. It's one thing to understand, it's another thing to talk about it, it's another thing to do something about it. We've got to get to the do something about it stage pretty quickly. Thank you.
And I also want to just thank him.
And you have been watching live coverage of the Great Lakes Commission and the International Joint Commission discussing Lake Erie and nutrients problems in the Great Lakes.